let's get started with day 4. So with day 4, there's two different overarching topics for today. The first is the cardiovascular system, and then a heavy emphasis on calculations. So for those of you who have access to the cardiovascular system content on your membership, I want you to watch the Introduction to the Cardiovascular System webinar, and I want you to watch these videos in order of those titles. For those of you who are non-members, what I want you to focus on today is an introduction to the cardiovascular system, an introduction to hypertension. Take a look at hypertension in adults, their diagnosis and treatment, pharmacological treatment for hypertension, non-pharmacological treatment for hypertension, assessing Q risk, classes of medication that are used for hypertension, and let's break those down. So I want you to understand the renin angiotensin aldosterone system, so the RAS system, angiotensin converting enzymes, so ACE inhibitors. Go through them, have a good understanding of their indications, the side effects, cautions, contraindications, and any monitoring requirements, and do the same for calcium channel blockers and thiazide diuretics, and then end off with summarizing what you've gone through. Again, this will be self-directed study for this aspect of today. If you are not a member, if you are a member, these are the same titles that we use on the membership. And then I want you to go through Calculations Workshop 1, which is a webinar recording where we go through calculation questions. And as a bonus for non-members that are watching this video, I'm going to add that entire video to the end of when I stop speaking. I will play the Calculations Workshop 1. And I want you to go through 12 calculation questions, one of each type. For those of you who have access to the membership, I want you to watch the entire calculations module 2, which has all the 12 examples there for you with the working out. So let's get started with day 4. I'm going to play the calculation workshop now, and after this is completed, I want you to focus on the cardiovascular system and all the topics that I've laid out here.
So hello everyone, my name's Nkesia, or just NK for short. I'm one of the clinical educators for calculations on the MicroPharm platform, and really excited to go over a session on calculations with you. Now, as a presenter, I like to be as interactive as possible. So the more interaction that we get on the chat, obviously, the more the more incentive that we have at MicroPharm to put these sessions together, really to sort of support you as you progress through your training year. A bit of a quick introduction about me, just so you know who I am, and hopefully so you're assured I know what I'm talking about. So currently I'm the divisional lead pharmacist for general and specialist medicine at Ashford St. Peter's Hospital. I went to Durham University where I did my MPharm from 2015 to 2019. I did my pre-reg pharmacist year, which is now the foundation training year, from 2019 to 2020. I was one of the pharmacists or pre-reggers who was affected by COVID. So unfortunately, I didn't get to do the registration assessment in 2020 because the Excel Centre became Nightingale. So we were provisionally registered, and that was from the end of 2020, around September, August, until March 2021. So I passed after qualifying. Well, I qualified after passing the exam first time. Rotated between a few different clinical specialties from 2020 to 2022. I took on the post as the interim divisional lead of hematology and oncology from November 2022 to mid 2023, and then went back into general and specialist medicine, where my specialties involve care of the elderly, respiratory medicine, and palliative care. And I still do a bit of teaching for current pre-regs and junior doctors and nurses as well. In terms of some thoughts about calculations, I just want to get a bit of a show of hands, just sort of see what people feel about calcs in particular. In terms of calculations, these are just some of the things that I've heard before. So that they're impossible. I hate dilutions. That tends to be one that a lot of trainee pharmacists talk about. Don't like variable rate questions. What numbers do I round to? just a quick 5 minutes or so, not too long. Um, are there any other things or feelings that people have about calculations? Again, um, the more we get in the chat, obviously, the better the outcome will be generally as far as calculations go. So what is it that people feel about calculations? Either a certain topic they don't like or a topic they do like. We don't want to keep it all negative. But what are some general thoughts and feelings people have about calculations? Okay, so Arena, you've said pharmacokinetics and SPC questions. Are these all things that you find difficult? Devisha, you said dilutions are tough. They are tough. And actually, we have a dilution question in today's freebie session. So hopefully you've all brought your calculator so you can attempt some of these calculations with me. Pyros, you said that infusion rates are tough as well. They can be. I definitely agree with that. Ellie, you said displacement values. So these are all topics which I do cover in the MicroPharm series in different modules. You may have already seen modules 1 and 2, and I will be releasing modules 3 and 4 in the relatively near future, so do look out for those. Dilutions as well and displacement values. So it seems like there's a really, really common trend here, and it's just a trend that we tend to see year on year. A lot of the time, the GPhC will release information as to which types of calculation questions candidates find difficult, and it tends to be dilutions, it tends to be displacement values, it tends to be infusion rates, and SPC questions as well. So these are all really common questions that candidates find difficult. Fortunately, we're here to support you with them, so then you find them a little bit easier to manage. And these are some other common questions that I think we tend to ask ourselves when it comes to calculations. So how can I avoid running out of time? How do I actually understand the questions, and how do I even answer the questions? And finally, why are these questions so difficult? So which numbers are you meant to use? Which equations are you meant to use? A quick show of hands, just put like a quick yes or like a thumbs up, whatever you'd like to. Are these questions that we ask ourselves as well? Um, I think I've hit the nail on the head. I'm fairly confident I have, but I think a lot of these questions are questions you probably asked yourself at some point. And Julia, I think you've even said that you don't have much confidence in it in a lot. And honestly, I commend you for saying that, because a lot of us, especially in our training year, don't have the confidence to even point out that you find it challenging. I think we tend to push it back, we tend to leave it. And then when it becomes a problem, then we sort of panic a little bit and we sort of get into the mindset of thinking, oh, well, I'll just scrape by with calculations. Well, hopefully by the end of this session, I'll have given you all a good bit of guidance as to how to navigate calculations to the point where you don't even need to just sort of scrape by calculations at all. You can actually encourage yourself and really take on a much better mindset so you can really excel with them. And that's really what I and the rest of the team at MicroPharm really want to get you doing. I think firstly, it's worth thinking a little bit about what the exam looks like. Um, with the move over to digital, so we're beyond paper, everything is now on a screen that looks like this, where you can flag questions and you can highlight bits of information. How many of you already have gone onto the GPhC website to have a look at the sample calculations questions? Don't be afraid to say no. I would expect most of these answers to be no at this stage. So it'll be really interesting to see. Okay, so mixed answers here. So some yeses, some nos. For those of you who said yes, that's fantastic. That's already a good start. You know what to expect with how these questions are laid out. For those of you who have said no, I would definitely encourage you to just go on the GPhC website after this session and just look up what the example questions look like. I think there are about 5 or 10, okay, that you can have a look at. And they are very, very similar to what you'd get in your actual assessment. Julia, I did get your question. So let's have a look. HE did a similar type calcs thing that was mandatory to do in August. Okay, so if you've all done these HE questions, then you already have a very good idea of what to expect. okay, in terms of their layout. And Irida, I'll answer that question in a bit of a Q&A that will structure towards the end of the session, so do sit tight for that. And if any of you have any other questions, do take note of them, and I'll answer them towards the end in one go. So a good place to start is just to know what the exam looks like itself. The next few slides are some tips that I came up with and that I've used and shared for other trainee pharmacists that I've supervised throughout the years. So firstly, part one of the assessment is made out of 40 questions and you have 2 hours to complete these. So some quick maths for you. 2 hours is 120 minutes. 120 minutes for 40 questions. You have 3 minutes per question. Now, when you do your baseline calculations for HE, or when you've done them, I'm sure a lot of you have said, oh, I didn't have enough time or I didn't finish. Quick show of hands if people feel that way, like they felt they didn't have enough time. Let's put a quick yes or no in the chat if that's the case. Yeah, a lot of people tend to say, I don't have enough time for calculations. Well, in reality, you do. 3 minutes per question is quite a good bit of time. If you got your phone now and you set a timer for 3 minutes, 3 minutes drags on a good bit. Now, that isn't to say that you need to use 3 minutes exactly for every single question. Some questions won't require the full 3 minutes. Some of them will only take a minute. Some of them might take 4 minutes, but generally that averages out. So hopefully, as you practice questions after this session, as you practice questions throughout your training year, I want you to time yourself. Okay, give yourself 3 minutes and just see how far you get on with each question. Generally, I like to say practice on on accuracy first and then move on to speed. Okay, because as long as you're getting the questions right, that's the main thing, and then you can work on answering them more quickly. But remember, you have 3 minutes per question. Hopefully that should give you a good bit of confidence with answering some of these questions. That takes away a lot of the fear around time management. The other thing as well are calculators. Now, I know a lot of you already mentioned that HEE gave you a baseline calculations assessment, and there is an on-screen calculator. But in all honesty, I didn't like using that calculator. Okay, I found it clunky. I thought having to click on things was quite cumbersome. Hopefully, by now, all of you have gotten one of the calculators on the screen. Okay, just type a quick yes if you have, or a quick thumbs up. Have you definitely already got one of these calculators? Yeah, fantastic. Okay. I even have, do I even have my old calculator? I think I've given it to one of the trainee pharmacists, believe it or not. So the calculator that you take on into the assessment has to be one of these. Because if it isn't one of these, they will not let you into the assessment room and you're already at a disadvantage. Okay, when I sat my part one calculation assessment, I saw about two other candidates who had one of those nice scientific calculators that you were able to use at A level or GCSE, and they had to leave them outside the room. And when that happens, you start to panic a little bit. The other thing as well that I'd encourage you to do as you're practicing these questions, practice using your calculator, pick one calculator that you're comfortable with and use that for the rest of your training year. Because the one thing that we tend to see a lot of the time when we're marking papers is students will put in the wrong number, like they'll panic and they tap the wrong number or the wrong key on their calculator. And it's so easily done. But if you get used to using a calculator, one specific model, that makes you so much more efficient when it comes to answering some of these questions as well. Okay, so already that's 2 tips that have already made you much more likely to succeed in part one of the registration assessment, knowing your time management and encouraging regular calculator use, okay, and familiarizing yourself with a specific calculator throughout the year. The second bit I'm going to sort of talk about here is understanding the question. These aren't just calculations questions. Now, these are questions about pharmacy practice from a calculations perspective. Now, does everyone know what I mean when I say that? Put yes in the chat if you do, put no in the chat if you don't. And I would expect most of you to say no. because if that's the case, and that means that we've got stuff to work with. But if you say yes, that's great because it means we're on the same page. Either way, we're going to build on that in the next few slides because we're actually going to practice some questions together. I see a lot of yeses, which is absolutely fantastic. Okay. So these aren't just calculations questions. These are questions about pharmacy practice from a calculations perspective. Okay. And the best thing that you can do is try to imagine it in a real world perspective. So we're now going to have a go at a worked example together. So we have a 6-year-old child who weighs 18 kilograms and they're prescribed an oral dose of 120 milligrams of drug A 3 times a day. You have available to you an oral solution containing 4% weight per volume of drug A. What volume in milliliters of the oral solution do you require for a 7-day course? Give your answer to the nearest 5 milliliters. Now, in this situation, I would say pause the video. It's a live stream, so we wouldn't pause it, but I want you to give yourself 3 minutes. Okay, now I'm going to get my phone and I'm going to set a 3-minute timer. Okay. When the 3 minutes is up, the timer will go off. And then I want all of you to just write down your answer. And then I'm going to ask a few of you to sort of share what your answer was just in the live chat. Okay. So does everyone have their calculator? If not, now would be a great time to grab specifically one of your scientific, your GPhC approved calculators. Don't use a calculator that you're not going to have access to in the actual assessment. Okay. It's not a good exercise. So I've set 3 minutes. I'm going to start the timer in 5 seconds. And in 3 minutes time, we're going to go through it. Okay, so 3, 2, 1. Your time starts now. You have 3 minutes to answer this question. You might find that you don't need the full 3 minutes, and that will reinforce the point I made earlier. Okay, as a gentle reminder, that's half of your time. So you now have 1 minute and 25 seconds left. Okay, you have 30 seconds left, but I'm sure some of you may have already finished the question a good while ago now. Some of you may be getting towards the end. Either way, that's absolutely fine. We'll go through all of that shortly. Okay, so you now have 15 seconds. And time's up. So that was your full 3 minutes for that question. Quick show of hands. Who felt 3 minutes dragged for a bit? Who felt that 3 minutes wasn't enough time? And who felt that 3 minutes was just about in the middle? So, Rita, you said that it dragged for you. Amira, you said it was just enough time. Alt, you said it was enough. Julie, you said it was loads of time for this one. Ellie said it dragged. Yeah, so this hopefully reinforces the point that I was making earlier. 3 minutes is an average per question. You do not need 3 minutes for every single question. Okay. In that respect, for those of you that finish within a minute, that's a whole 2 minutes you can then spend on another question. Okay. And that could be an infusion rate question if you have a question about IVIG. Okay. It could very well be a question on sort of health economics, where you've got loads of numbers to multiply and subtract from each other, or numbers you need to treat calculation if you forget the equation. Okay. So the fact that a lot of you didn't need that much time is a great sign. Now, whenever it comes to these types of questions, the first thing that I always do is I highlight parts of the question. And for those of you who have already been on the GPhC website, you'll know that you can use the highlighter tool. Now, I got an answer of 65 milliliters when I rounded to the nearest 5 mil. Is that what everybody got? So, Rita, you said 65 mil. Alt, you said yes, yes, yes. Fantastic. Good. Okay, so you all got the right answer. It would be incredibly awkward if I got the wrong answer and all of you got the right answer. So that's always a good sign. That's fantastic. Smashed it, guys. Well done. Now, anytime it comes to calculations, one of the biggest mistakes that I've noticed that candidates make is they'll just see numbers and they'll just jump right into doing the calculation. You know, they'll just start putting things in that calculator, they'll start writing things down. But we don't stop to actually think about what the question is asking us to do. And this is where we make mistakes, because we put the wrong number in somewhere and we can miss out a bit of context that could be incredibly important. For a question like this, maybe not as much, but for the questions where you've got loads and loads of text to read through, that becomes a lot more common. So you probably noticed there that I've actually highlighted bits of the question. So I highlighted 120 milligrams of drug A, TDS. So that lets me know that they're going to be having 120 milligrams 3 times a day. Okay, that's something for me to remember. I've also got this 4% weight per volume. Okay, now who feels confident in explaining what 4% weight per volume means? What does that mean effectively? Okay, it's a means of concentration, of expressing concentration, but what does that actually mean in practice? Okay, you guys are absolutely smashing it. So yeah, well done, guys. Fantastic. I'm seeing loads of the right answer here. 4 grams in 100 mil. So percentage weight per volume is a way of saying how many grams you have something in a given volume. Okay, not too dissimilar to saying weight per weight. You could have grams within 100 grams, but generally it's per 100 something. But yes, in this situation, it's grams per 100 mil. So a 4% weight per volume of drug A is 4 grams in 100 mil. That's also something for you to keep in mind. Now, the question is asking us, what volume in mil do you require for a 7-day course? Now, already from putting together this question, there are 2 pitfalls. The first is that I give my answer in grams or milligrams. I completely missed the fact that they want it in mil. That's a really common mistake here. Another common mistake is me not focusing on the fact it's a 7-day course and just saying how much they need per dose. Also a really common mistake. And you would think, well, how is that possible? It's entirely possible when you're stressed and when you haven't practiced enough. Okay. That's why I want to get all of you into the habit of reading the question and highlighting parts of the question, really understanding the numbers before you jump into actually doing the calculation. So the first thing I would do here is say, okay, well, 4% weight per volume is 4 grams in 100 mil. Therefore, that's 1 gram in 25 mil of solution. This is the same as saying 1,000 milligrams in 25 mil of solution. Now, you might be asking yourself, well, why did I do that? Well, I did that because this child is receiving each dose in milligrams. So it makes life easier if I also convert my concentration into milligrams. Now, I'm quite old school, so I like to figure out what volume is equivalent to 1 milligram so I can then scale that up to 120 milligrams. So I figured out that 1 milligram is in 0.025 mil of the solution. Therefore, 120 milligrams is 3 mil. 3 mil 3 times a day is 9 mil a day. The 7 mil, that's 63 milliliters. And 63 milliliters is closer to 65 mil than 60 because the question has explicitly asked me to round to the nearest 5 mil. And actually, in practice, that's not unreasonable because if you've ever tried to measure out, let's say this was an antibiotic, okay, the viscosity, they're thick. What happens if, let's say, you're trying to give this to a children are quite fussy. They knock the oral syringe out of the parent's hand, and that's it. It's dose wasted. Okay, I mean 2 mil, unlikely in practice, but that's why we give a full bottle, for instance. Okay, so hopefully that makes a bit of sense. Was that question okay? Give me a quick yes or a no in the chat if that all made sense. Are we all happy with that? Are we happy with the direction that we're going in? Yeah? All right, fantastic. You guys are smashing it. Well done. Let's move on to another question. Now, this one I think relates to what numbers am I meant to use? Because this is something else that's always asked by candidates. What number do I use and where? Potassium permanganate solution, 1 in 8,000, is prepared from a stock of 10 times this strength. A patient has been directed to use 200 ml of the diluted solution every day for 10 days. How much potassium permanganate in grams will be needed to make sufficient stock solution? Give your answer to 2 decimal places. Like I said before, I'm going to get my phone. I'm going to set a timer for 3 minutes. And when time is up and we're ready to go through the answer, we'll go through the answer. So I'm going to set 3 minutes again. Hope you all have your calculators, pen and paper, or a tablet if you want to use that. But your 3 minutes officially starts now. And again, I'll be interested to see whether you find that 3 minutes drags again for you, or whether actually you're a bit closer to the wire with this one. There's a bit more text with this question, but we'll see how you all get on. Okay, gentle reminder, that is half of your time. You have 1 minute and 26 seconds left. I've already gotten some answers by direct message. So if you do want to direct message me the answer, just make sure that you do direct message it and you don't put it to the wider chat, then by all means, absolutely fine. But I've already had a couple of direct messages, so I'll be quite annoying and I won't say whether the answer is correct or not. But well done for answering the question as quickly as you have done. You will have 30 seconds left for those of you who are still continuing with the question. Let's go back. Okay, and time is up. So I did have a couple of answers by direct message. Let's go through this question, okay? There's a lot of text here. Actually, you know what? Firstly, quick show of hands. Who here found that they ran out of time? Or who here found that they had less time effectively to answer this question in comparison to the previous question? What are our general thoughts here? Be good to see what everyone thinks. So, Mira, you said it took plenty of time, but interesting. But Sarita and Paris, you both said that you could have done with more time. So I think this is a really good example of where actually there is so much variation in questions and how you approach them. Okay. The questions that have a lot of text where there is more room to make error because you've misread something, that's time taken away. It's also worth remembering that this is 3 minutes to read the question, attempt the question, and in an ideal world, also check your answer. Okay. When you put that in perspective, yes, it can be quite daunting to try and tackle all of those things in 3 minutes. However, it is doable, provided that you have an approach that is something that you can replicate. The first thing I did here, like I always do, highlight parts of the question. Okay. 1 in 8,000. What does that mean? Who feels brave to sort of share? What does 1 in 8,000 mean? Because this is a way of expressing concentration that I think confuses a lot of people. But yes, I see a good couple of correct answers there. It is 1 gram in 8,000 mil, okay, or 1,000 milligrams in 8,000 mil, okay. Again, it is not at all different to your percentage weight per volume, okay. So that's something that's worth thinking about here. So well done. Now, potassium permanganate solution 1 in 8,000 is prepared from a stock of 10 times this strength. Now, that's something to also remember because concentrations is one of the areas that you're likely to be examined on in your registration assessment. When we say that this 1 in 8,000 is prepared from a stock 10 times this strength, this means that the 1 in 8,000 is the diluted solution that the patient is using. So for those of you who have seen potassium permanganate being dispensed or used, you might see it used in patients who have maybe diabetic complications or ulcers. Okay, so it's sort of to keep wounds clean. Okay, you might soak the wound in particular and then change bandages, or so the stock is 10 times the strength, which would imply that if you have the stock on the shelf, that is 10 times stronger than what the patient is going to use. The patient has been asked to use 200 ml of the diluted solution every day for 10 days. And how much potassium permanganate in grams will be needed to make sufficient stock solution? So already that's two things that I can note here. There's the possibility that the question, you misread it and you give your answer in mil, and you say, okay, well, this is how much of the diluted solution the patient needs. And that's correct as far as in reality, that is the volume that the patient might need, but that's not what the question's asked you for. The question has asked you how much potassium manganate in grams will be needed to make sufficient stock solution. So let's have a look at the question itself. Now, the stock solution has 10 grams in 8,000 mil. Now, we know that the diluted solution is 1 in 8,000. So if it's 10 times stronger, that's the same as saying 10 grams in 8,000 mil. If you didn't want to do that, you could have done 1 in 800 mil. That would have also been fine because it ends up being equivalent. 10 in 8,000 is the same as saying 1 in 800. Okay. And we've said that here. That's the same as 1 gram in 800 mil, which is the same as saying 0.5 grams in 400 mil, That's the same saying 0.25 grams in 200 mil and 0.125 grams in 100 mil, which is 0.125%. Now, I converted it to a percentage because when I was doing this calculation, I liked working with percentages. But I do appreciate that some of you who got the answer may not have needed to use percentages at all. But I've sort of broken it down step by step. So for those of you who didn't necessarily get the correct answer, it's clearer. And this just gives you one way of approaching it. Now, the stock solution is 0.125%. Diluted solution is 10 times weaker than that. That's going to be 0.0125%. Now, the patient needs 200 mil for 10 days. That's 2,000 mil. Now, I'm sure a lot of you remember C1V1, C2V2 from uni. So that's why I went with this angle, because I quite liked using C1V1 and C2V2. Okay. Now, C1V1, C is the stock, V1 is the unknown. That's the unknown volume that we need. C2 is our final concentration and V2 is our final volume. If I rearrange this to make V1 the subject, I get 200 mil. Now, if I use my stock solution again, already I had said that 0.25 grams in 200 mil. So the correct answer here was 0.25 grams. So your answer was already to 2 decimal places. And actually, when I received some of the answers, one of the answers that I got here was 200 mil, which is the correct volume, but that's not quite what the question wanted me to do. The answer was 0.25 grams, because the question asks me how much potassium manganate will be needed in grams to make sufficient stock. Okay, so be very, very careful with these types of questions, because it's really easy to just sort of miss that and make a mistake. Okay, how did everyone find that question on the whole? Did people find this difficult, more difficult than the last one? Did people find it easy? Was it somewhere in the middle? Was going over this type of question useful? What do we all generally think? Okay, so Alt, you said good. Amira, you said that it was quite simple when you realize which numbers you're working with. And that's really the main thing. And that's one of the reasons I put this question into the live stream, because it's so easy to get confused and get overwhelmed when you've got all these different numbers. But when you highlight the numbers you need to work with, it becomes so much easier. So Alt, you did it that way. Okay. Um, and that's really good. That's really nice and simplified. So that would probably save you more time. So that's good. Ellie, you said that you got it right, but you didn't quite understand how, so it was useful to go through it. And that's what we like to hear. As far as an educator goes for calculations, one thing that I've told a lot of students is sometimes, especially as you're preparing for the assessment, there is more emphasis, or there should be more emphasis on you understanding how to approach the question rather than just getting the right answer. So that's the other thing that I would say here. Okay, so well done, guys. You're smashing it. So, Arita, you have a question, and I think it's fine to answer here. If an answer for a question is a whole number, but the GPhC asks you to do it to one decimal place, do we then write 5.0? So, I would say yes. I think it's unlikely the GPhC would do that. They tend to make it quite clear, um, in situations where to 2 decimal places where you get an answer that's to 3 decimal places or 4. Okay. They don't tend to ask questions where you get a whole number in your answer, then they ask you to do it to 1 decimal place. But in theory, yes, that is what you would do. So the one thing that I'm going to say now is really reinforce something that you'll see in all the other videos in the modules that we have for calculations on the MicroPharm platform. Your success as far as the calculations is really understanding your question types. All of these I've taken from the GPhC website. And so by the end of your trainee year, you should all be confident enough with all of these types of questions. Okay. Now, what I would encourage you all to do after this session, go through that list and use a traffic light system. Highlight the ones in green that you're really confident with, highlight the ones in yellow that you're kind of in the middle, and the ones in red, focus on those ones and then work backwards. Okay. So for a lot of you who express things like infusion rates, in red, focus on infusion rates. For pharmacokinetics, focus on red. Um, okay. Dilutions, if those are your amber, then sort of prioritize those accordingly. Okay. So just to make sure that you're addressing all of these. Also remind yourself that it isn't unreasonable for a question to incorporate multiple things here. So actually, David, you've asked about what number C1 was. So here I said that C1 was the stock concentration, which was 0.125%. Um, this is an example of a question where you have dilutions and you have concentrations because you had to, well, you didn't necessarily need to, but here you converted between different ways of expressing concentration using different units as well. Okay. But then it was also a dilution question. So from that perspective, this is actually a question where you were examined on multiple things within the one question. That being said, with there are 40 calculation questions in part one, there aren't 40 types of questions there. So you may get repetition. You may get more of one type of question than another type of question. So familiarize yourselves with all of these. Okay, it's incredibly important that you do. The other takeaway messages that I'm going to give to all of you before we move on to one more dilution question is that calculations are by no means impossible. And all of you are training to be qualified pharmacists. It doesn't matter whether you're in primary care, secondary care, tertiary care, or whether you're cross sector. I remember when I was a newly qualified band 6, there was a shortage of sodium bicarbonate polyfuses. And our trust sent out guidance to say you need to take higher strength. I think it was 8.4%. And then you then need to essentially guide the nurses on how to dilute it. So then I then had one of the junior doctors walk up to me on the ward and say, my consultant wants to give sodium bicarbonate 1.26%. Do we have the polyfuses? I said, no, there's a shortage. He then said, well, we need it. Is there any other way that we can give it? And then and it was a bit of a throwback for me. I then had to do a bit of a calculation on how to take that 8.4% and dilute it right down to 1.26% and then feed that back to the nursing team and the prescribing team so it could be given safely, okay, via a peripheral line. So for those of you who really, really hate calculations, I promise you when you qualify, and you will qualify because you've signed up to MicroPharm, you will come across calculations in some respect at some point. For those of you in primary care and PCN, it may be more health economics based than in secondary care, where it might be more dilution based, but you will come across it in some capacity. But ultimately, remember your time management. You have about 3 minutes per question. Remember to think about the context of the question. These aren't just calculations questions for the sake of calculations questions. Okay. Think about the context. Think about whether the answer you're putting down is realistic and whether a member of the public or a healthcare professional can actually work with that answer that you've given. And also highlight parts of the question and break it down into smaller bits to make it much easier to understand as well. We'll finish off with one more question. Okay. And it's a nice, easy one to sort of finish off of. Okay. How many milliliters of water must be added to 500 ml of a 1.26% stock solution of sodium chloride diluted to 0.9% to normal saline? And I've been really nice and I've given you the formula C1B1 equals C2B2. Okay. Now, I'm going to give you all, I'm going to be slightly mean here. I'm going to give you all 2 minutes rather than 3 minutes. If you do use the 3 minutes, don't worry about it. That's fine because that's your standard. But I'm just going to give 2 minutes just to put a bit of pressure on all of you. Okay, so your 2 minutes starts now. If you want to let me know what your answer was before 2 minutes is up, then by all means, you can direct message me using the chat function. Make sure that you click direct message just so you don't give away the potential answer to everybody else. But that's only if you feel confident in doing so. Either way, we're going to go through the question all the same. Okay, so I've got a couple of answers so far. We'll be going through the answer really shortly. You have a minute and 10, well, now a minute and 10 seconds left for those of you who are still working. Okay, I'm getting a few more answers here. I'm getting a bit of a trend. Okay. I won't let on whether that's a good trend or not a good trend. But I've got two camps of answers here. And I think it definitely highlights something that I mentioned earlier on in the live stream. Okay, we have now got 30 seconds left. Okay, definitely getting some more answers. I think we're continuing with the trend here. You have 5 seconds left. And time's up. Right. So it's very interesting. Half of you said the answer was 200 mil. The other half of you said it was 700 mil. And I think this highlights that when you have pressured time, you miss that last step. It goes back to highlighting information in the question. And the question says, how many milliliters of water must be added to 500 ml or 1.26% stock solution of sodium chloride to dilute it to 0.9%? And we gave you the formula. Now, the instinct here is to plug the numbers into the formula to find out what V2 is. Okay. And in that situation, you end up with an answer of 700 mil. Okay. However, the question wanted you to find out what volume of water has to be added, not what the final volume is. So if you do C1V1, C2V2, where you rearrange it to make V2 the subject, where V2 then equals C1 times V1 divided by C2, 700 mil of saline 0.9% is equivalent to 500 mil times 1.26%. The difference is 200 mil. So you need to add 200 mil of water to your 500 mil of 1.26% stock solution to make it 0.9. So your correct answer here was 200 milliliters. Okay. And I think that is a really good indicator of where when you have less time or you think you have less time, there's that one step that you miss. Okay, and it's something really, really easy to miss. How many milliliters of water must be added? Okay, and that's why it's really, really important that you highlight parts of the question. So that's that third sort of key tip that I gave you all earlier. Highlight parts of the question to keep giving you that focus. Okay. Now, with that being said, I think that's it as far as the actual presentation goes. We still have a good bit of time to go over any questions that anyone might have about calculations. But again, I do want to send post all of you to the comment that Yasir has put in the chat. Do make sure to check out the free GPhC exam fact sheets just by signing up to Locate a Locum. Doesn't even take 5 minutes, takes no time at all. Do make sure to check out the Flow Club Productivity Bundle, also incredibly useful. And it's a great way to hold all of you accountable when it comes to revising. I remember when I was preparing for the registration assessment, some of my friends and I would jump on Zoom and we would study with each other. We would have an hour of silence and then 10 minutes of asking each other questions and then call it a day. And that was really, really useful. Do also make sure to give us feedback as well. If you found this useful, great. If you didn't find it useful at all, then just let us know, because then we then know how to change this to make it better for you. Okay. And if you haven't already, make sure to join the MicroPharm membership. There are only 5 places left, so you definitely want to secure those. So let's go over some questions then. So Davisha, can you suggest some resources for calculations questions